Hello and welcome to week 12 of PUBH 610. Today we will discuss assessing community health. The learning objectives for this week are to appreciate the importance of a community health assessment, to know how to conduct a community health assessment, and within that, how to select an assessment facilitator, involve community members, collect primary data, and know where to look for sources of secondary health data, and then lastly, to be able to use the findings to make recommendations and disseminate the information. Community health assessments are an essential public health activity. And therefore, as leaders and managers in public health, you will be expected to know how to do a community health assessment, or at the very least, be able to evaluate the merit of a community health assessment that's been done by someone else. The Institute of Medicine stated that every public health agency has the responsibility to assess the health of the community that it serves. This duty can't be delegated, and every public health agency should regularly and systematically assemble, analyze, and make available information on the health of its community. A public health agency typically passes a resolution. They come to an agreement that they want to conduct an assessment, and this resolution should be disseminated widely. And you should outline the purposes, a definition of the priority, assurance that adequate resources will be available, request support from the community as needed, and specify a venue right from the beginning for presenting final results. For example, will you publish the information online? Will you do presentations at the local community board, etc.? The purposes of a community health assessment are listed here. They're to analyze a population's current health status, to determine the strengths and weaknesses of the community's health system, to identify a community's health needs, and then to develop recommendations to meet those needs and prioritize those needs. Because this is a priority activity, adequate staff time and resources need to be allocated. And the health agency must commit to the assessment as being a priority and provide and assure that there will be community involvement. And community involvement can include private sector, public, and elected officials. And sometimes you may need to contract outside consultants who have specialized in conducting focus groups or surveying or disseminating findings if you don't have enough staff to conduct it all in-house. Once you decide to implement a health assessment, you need to decide who will lead the process. And this person will have many responsibilities, such as identifying assessment tools, establishing a process plan and timeline, staffing and coordinating personnel. They'll also have to assist in engaging the community and identifying and assembling data, as well as many other tasks. And this typically requires a 2-year commitment and a variety of skills, but specifically skills in community organizing, group dynamics, and communication. One of the first things that you'll need to do is assemble your project team. Members of the project team may come from public health, other health programs, or be community volunteers. The next step is forming a steering committee to represent various stakeholders and reflect the demographic composition of the community with respect to age, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. And in my experience, this last point about having committee members reflect the community is often lacking. And I encourage you to keep this in mind the next time that you participate in a community health assessment and advocate that the steering committee is more representative of the community that it's serving. There are many tools available to help you conduct a community assessment, and several of them are listed here, such as the Planned Approach to Community Health, otherwise known as PUBH, Healthy People 2010, the Mobilizing for Action Through Planning and Partnership, etc. And at the end of your textbook chapter, there are links for additional information for all of these. Just remember that all members of the steering committee should weigh in on which tools you use and come to an agreement. And remember that these tools can always be modified and should be modified to meet the needs of your specific community. Now on to the data. Collecting and analyzing data from many sources is an essential step in the community health assessment. Usually, you'll need to look in several different places to find all of the data that you'll need. Some sources are listed here, such as the CDC and the Census Bureau, which provide national and more microdata, as well as state departments of health, which obviously provide state-level data. Another potential source of regional data are hospitals and councils of government and disaster service groups. More locally, you can look at your local health department. We have the New York City Department of Health, which is amazing and a great resource for us in the city. And you could also look at local hospitals, police departments, etc. To perform a basic assessment, a health agency should select a set of standardized health and social status indicators. Continuing to talk about data, when you're using existing resources, they can help provide benchmarks for measuring change. So once you've selected these key indicators, then you can track them over time. You can see if they're moving in the right direction or not. And I want you to remember that data is a powerful tool if you use it correctly. So for instance, you can't overwhelm your audience with 100 indicators and complicated statistical language. But if you clearly demonstrate the magnitude of your problem with a couple of key, powerful data points, it can really convey and get people involved. It can convey the need and can get a lot of buy-in. And it can help create a sense of shared responsibility. Both qualitative and quantitative data can be used in both primary and secondary data. Remember that secondary data is data that someone else collected for another purpose, while primary data is data that you collect on your own through things like surveys, focus groups, or key informant interviews. And good health assessments will begin with reviewing the secondary data to see what's available, and then they'll fill in the gaps with their own primary data collection. Here are some other sources of secondary data, such as you see CDC's consensus indicators, Healthy People. There are so many sources once you get online. And when it comes to primary data collection, qualitative research is used to collect information from interviews, focus groups, group processes, and the Delphi technique. And quantitative research involves typically surveys. Here are some potential methods that you can use. We're not going to go into depth in each of these methods. Your evaluation course will do that, but just remember that key informant interviews will have a set of prearranged questions which are open-ended, and you'll conduct those with specific individuals that you've identified that you think have a lot of information that could be useful to you. Focus groups should be with between 5 and 10 people in a group setting. So it's a manageable amount of people. You want to make sure that you're hearing from everyone in the group. And these are a great way to observe norms around a topic. The group process is something that I haven't seen as commonly, but you're bringing people together and dividing them into groups to brainstorm. And then the Delphi technique is a way to bring together experts to get a consensus on statements or assessments. And then lastly, surveys are used to collect data from a sample audience. Once the committee is set and the structure of the group is in place, the community needs to be involved. The community should be surveyed to obtain their perceptions of the health strengths and weaknesses for both their health and their community's health. And your survey should always begin with basic demographic information. The desired information can be collected in at least 3 ways. You can do formal random phone surveys, you could do focus groups, you could do printed surveys or questionnaires. And just remember that keeping the public informed and involved in the entire process is very important. And it's also recommended that project staff leaders meet regularly with the media so that they can help you to keep people informed. Some individuals that you meet along the way may want to become more involved, and they should be recognized and given the opportunity to take on more responsibility in something called an advisory committee. And the steering committee should identify enough residents for the advisory committee to have 4 or 5 subcommittees. So that way each subcommittee can focus on a specific area of community health. And the group's responsibilities include identifying community themes and strengths, the local public health system, and the community's health status. The first meeting should include both the steering committee and advisory group to discuss the process, including timelines for the project. Here is some additional guidance on the subcommittees and advisory committees. The second meeting of the advisory committee should be devoted to organizing and beginning the work, and the subcommittee should meet at least bi-weekly for about 6 months. But I want to stress that these are just ideas and suggestions for you to consider. What your engagement with your community will look like depends on the health issue and the community. So if a bi-weekly meeting for 6 months is too much to ask, feel free to reduce the number of meetings, or maybe make sure that people can call in if they can't attend in person. Everything here that we're discussing is largely customizable. Once you've started to generate findings, each subcommittee should produce a separate report, and recommendations should be developed to address each need. Staff of the local health agency can help to organize the information that you've put together, but they can't add to the reports. It really should be up to the committee to prioritize the needs, and each subcommittee should present their findings at a larger meeting of the steering committee. Remember, the point of this exercise is to identify the community's strengths and needs regarding health. The report is a guide for future health programming and resource development for organizations in the community. Another best practice is holding a public meeting at the end of the project to present the report. It's also important that everyone who worked on the report should receive a written invitation to the meeting, and printed copies should be disseminated, and other venues for dissemination should be explored, such as online. And it's important that everyone who participated in the report is recognized. I also encourage you to think about other things, like if you need to translate the report into different languages to make it more accessible for people in your community. In summary, community health assessments are a core public health function. And for those of you who've already been working in public health, I bet that you're familiar with community health assessments and you may have participated in some. For those of you who are new to the field or haven't worked on a community health assessment yet, it's very likely that you will at some point be asked to work on one. Regardless of your previous experience, I hope that this lecture makes it clear that there is a process for implementing a community health assessment. And one of the most important steps is the job of a public health leader and manager who needs to set up the team who will be conducting the assessment and provide guidance on how best to engage with the community. Because without their involvement and buy-in, it will be very difficult to get the information that you need. And as we discussed, there are many tools available to help you along the way. And you can use both quantitative and qualitative data, primary and secondary, to tell your story. And reporting and disseminating findings widely needs to be planned in advance and well thought out. Because what's the point of doing all this work if we don't share the information with others? That's going to be it for this week. Please check Blackboard for any other online materials.